Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to continue further in our series on women in history. Friends, in the previous session, yesterday we discussed on Harem and Women, and we have lots and lots of information to share with you with the particular topic that is Harem and Women. So we would be giving you more information on this topic only. And for the discussion, we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Pip. Dr. Shruti Pip is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Friends, if you wish to become part of this live session and if you wish to ask questions, then you can call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Pip, and would request her to give more information on the following topic. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the lecture.
Hello, Geetika. I'm glad to be on this platform once again and continue with the topic where I had left you last time. That is, we were discussing women participation in the political affairs of the state and how harem was not a very closed kind of an institution, something that had been projected in the past as the private realm. Instead of that, it was playing a very versatile role, and women were really coming out of their shells and they were participating directly or indirectly through the male agency in various political affairs of the state. So, politics was not an exclusively male domain even in medieval India. Medieval royal women they negotiated with the power and exercised an impressive control over the political affairs of the contemporary state. The harem was thus not socially segregated, but was actually a center of articulated authority and various hierarchical relations that took shape in harem. Now, this speaks volumes about the medieval political system and women participation in the various events that were being organized not only within harem, but also beyond harem. So, the institution that was considered to be a hallmark of patriarchy was subject to challenges both from within as well as from outside, and in fact they drew strength from the non-patriarchal networks, which were again being used by the women in the zenana. So, women's work in the field of administration as well as statecraft played a very important role in the shaping of the medieval political system. The interests of men and women in fact combined to create a different kind of factional politics and also configurations which cut across the dichotomy of gender. So, therefore, it was certainly not the argument is certainly not that women enjoyed complete independence or ultimate power in their hand, but the idea is to convey that though there were restraints on the movements of women, they were able to exercise some kind of authority, and sometimes this was done through the agency of men, sometimes through the agency of knots, whose role I had discussed in detail in the last class, and sometimes they used their own charm and intelligence to achieve the ends. But in this entire discourse of relationships that were evolving, the male agency continued to play a very important and central role. Because women could not act independently, but through the agency of men, they could be custodians of values, which they tried to preserve, but they could not usually take action on their own. So, therefore, man's power over the imperial sources of social and economic nature were considerably constrained and checked by this large scale and indirect participation of women. The institution which incorporated all these nitty-gritties of power politics, therefore, was not only the Mughal court, but also the zenana. Now, we have references to a number of royal women being in control and charge of land grants. So, there were the jagirs and the allowances which these royal women received from time to time, and these allowed them to not only legitimize their authority, but also to gain control over the resources, and so they were able to develop their own social and political networks, as well as they were able to champion various construction works, and they were able to patronize various activities that were going on in the empire. So, they spent their personal income in getting various gardens, mosques, sarais, etc., and even school buildings made. And one such example that can be quoted here is that of Jahan Ara, who begged, in fact, that the mosques be executed out of her own personal resources. That is, she did not want that the royal fund should be utilized for construction of mosques. Rather, her own personal money, her own purse should be used for this noble cause. And accordingly, it was her household which was authorized to undertake the work of construction of any site or monument, or for that matter any public building. Now, this was definitely a sign of control over funds, and this definitely empowered Mughal women. Then, if we talk about the salaries and the allowances, it was not as if only the royal women were enjoying these perks, and it was only they who had gained access and control over the resources. Even the service class, which was engaged on a large scale in harem, as I had discussed in the last class, the matrons etc., had generally 3, 4 or 500 rupees as monthly salary, which was huge for that time, and this again depended on the status of the post that they carried. So, the servants under their orders also earned a handsome salary for those times, which ranged from rupees 50 to rupees 200 per month. So, therefore, there was considerable money power which women in harem wielded, and in addition to these matrons, there were female superintendents of music, and there were women players who not only received their regular salary, but also presents and gifts in case they were able to please the audience, which was quite a frequent occurrence. So, therefore, the princes and the princesses regularly used to shower their gifts and presents, and therefore, these employees also gained considerable economic power over a period of time. Now, another very important feature of harem that one needs to go into greater detail is that of the hierarchy of status, and how it was not only the economic resources that were empowering women, but also the power differentials that were emerging due to the hierarchization of status. And it has usually been believed that the harem represented a Western public versus private dichotomy, but in reality the segregation in fact permitted the articulation of a hierarchy of status and authority among women, which was parallel to that which existed among men, and that hierarchy among men was very well displayed in the courtly manners and etiquettes, and the similar kind of hierarchy was being replicated in harem. and also there emerged a complex network of social, economic and political relations that existed both within the harem as well as in the outside realm, and indeed they even transcended the public or the private domain. So therefore, the relationships that emerged in harem continued to influence life beyond harem also, and there was always a marked presence of women into public sphere, and their seclusion didn't really didn't really prevent them from exercising political control, and also it neither stopped them from having control over their property. So therefore, it's a misnomer to think that parda necessarily meant seclusion, or it essentially meant some kind of prevention of Mughal women coming into the public sphere, because the private sphere in itself was quite empowering, and they were finding ways and means to maneuver the various developments that were going on. So therefore, a very important theme that emerges through this entire discourse is that of resourcefulness. How Mughal women or how medieval women for that matter were quite resourceful. They were quite tactful, and despite various measures that were being taken to confine them into the into the private space, they were able to come out on their own. And the zenana, which comprised of the ladies from different royal households, used their own resources and their own connections to become more powerful, influential and also politically empowered. A very good example that can be quoted here is that of Razia, who was the first example of a woman who in fact directly ruled over Delhi Sultanate, though it was for a brief span. She was called Umdat ul Niswan, a term that was used by the contemporary chroniclers, who thought that she was probably not born out of the right sex. So despite the fact that she had all the qualities of becoming an able ruler, but because she was a woman, so therefore she could not really be considered as worthy to become the ruler. And but if we closely observe her achievements in the short span of time when she ruled, it definitely appears that her sex was not a barrier, and in fact she was able to surmount so much opposition that there was, and so much political bickering that was going on at that time, and she did assume an independent political role. Initially her coinage had the name of her father, but soon she was able to give up that practice also, and from 1237 CE we observe that his name was also dropped from the coins, and though her accession was without any precedent in the Islamic world, but generally speaking, women in the eastern steppes region definitely enjoyed far greater freedom than had been enjoyed in any other part of the world. It is in this context that Peter Jackson remarked that various sources of 13th century in fact give prominence to their inauguration of a new reign, because when Razia assumed the throne, it was declared as the beginning of a new kind of a reign, a new period, a break from the past, and this was declared through a pledge of allegiance or bayat, which is mentioned in 1236, and therefore as has been pointed out by Jasjani, the Turkish amirs who abandoned Firoz Shah, who was ruling the Sultanate before Razia took over. So they kind of entered the capital and they performed bayat for Razia, thereby declaring their allegiance and their faithfulness, and also their acceptance of the change of events and the fact that it was a lady now who was going to rule over them. Now, when we move on further and when we come to the Mughal period, so definitely it was the Timurid politics again, which showed us various examples of how women were becoming more and more decisive, and through their indirect influence and familial ties, they were trying to maneuver, manipulate, or give a particular direction to the scheme of things. So, in the family of Babur, which inherited largely the traditions of Changiz Khan and Timur, it was definitely allowed to the females to participate in political discussions, and Babur himself was very fond of the senior ladies of the household and would regularly take their would regularly consult them. So therefore, this again proves that for the first at the time of the first two emperors, that is Babur and Humayun, the political rights of women could not really be done away with, and the Timurid politics, the traditions of Timurid politics definitely had an influence as far as this particular development was concerned. So they continued to play active part in politics, but from the time of Akbar onwards, when there was too much of rigidity as far as the court etiquettes were concerned, and there was some kind of an institutionalization that had developed, which encompassed not only the political but also the social realm, also the religious realm, that women participation took a backseat. So, talking about the time of Babur, Babur's mother, Kutlug Nigar Begum, accompanied him in his wars and in his wanderings, because Babur for most of his career was roaming here and there in search of finding a stable empire. So therefore, this was a time when the royal ladies and even the mother, Kutlug Nigar Begum, continued to side with him, and this is not only true of the Mughal emperors like Babur and Humayun. Even in Rajasthan region, there are a number of examples which show that how during the war times, the ladies, they used to organize army, and they even tried to protect forts. And Varsha Joshi has conducted a number of detailed research works related to this aspect, and she has given example of how Uma Deo of Jodhpur, who fought in 1542. Then another example is that of Rani Gangabai, who was wife of Rai Singh, who again was quite influential politically. So therefore, the whole idea of lineages needs to be discussed with the greater emphasis on women participation, because women were an important component of the traditional structure of authority, and they continue to play a very important link between the lineage groups. So therefore, the brides were items of exchange in marriage networks, and through these marriage networks, cementing of alliances was accomplished. So therefore, a bride was also a political statement. A marriage was very much a political statement, and therefore they were of considerable political importance, and their lineage, their legacy mattered a lot. And this also explains as to why Akbar, while following his particular Rajput policy and religious policy, ended up marrying so many Rajput women, because this was more like making a statement that since he was entering into matrimonial alliances with Rajput households, so now there was no chance of entering into any kind of turmoil or warfare with them, and both the families were going to remain at peace with each other and respect each other. So therefore, this was some kind of a political statement also. Then women were important to establish political relations and also settle political disputes among families or household, a fact that I had discussed in the last lecture with reference to Gulbadan Begum. So the decisions of the private realm could definitely influence the fortunes of the family in the public sphere. So therefore, one cannot really accept the dichotomy between the private and the public sphere, something that had been projected as being essentially a part of the Mughal culture, and especially which was seconded by the Western historiography. So therefore, the private sphere was quite empowering, and in fact it was ever molding the public sphere, and women were playing a very important and active role in this private sphere, which needs to incorporate a detailed revisionist approach towards understanding the functioning of the zenana. So it is said that of the women from powerful lineage, the traditional familial roles were as much a source of strength as they were evidence of subordination. So therefore, the lineage came with a baggage, and that baggage could be empowering, that baggage could be instrumental in the future relations. This also was with regard to the Indian custom of wiping out blood blood feuds by marriage alliances, because the marriages served that very purpose. Marriage was also a means of increasing the political power and also of increasing the social status for the families which entered into matrimonial relations with their superior households. So Rajputs also, while they were entering into a kind of marriage alliance with the Mughal princes or the Mughal rulers, for them also it was a give and take kind of a relationship, where there was the larger statement that was being made was that they were probably getting in close association with the most important ruling house of Hindustan, whereas for the Mughals it was more of a validation of their own status, that they were entering into relationship with a valorous race. So therefore, women became in fact a gift to the superior noble or even to the king's household, and by entering into these kind of marriage alliances, again they were playing a very important and an indirect political role. There are a number of references to women getting directly involved in political affairs also, that is not only through the harem politics or through the marriage alliances, but directly taking the political affairs of the state in their hands if the condition so desired. So for example, the Akbar inscription of 971 AD primarily refers to a queen, Hariya Devi, who was quite instrumental in giving a particular direction to the administration of the region. Then another example can be given of Shah Turkan, who was very important in the politics of early Delhi Sultanate, and she was not only a very influential lady, but she was also known as a war leader, as someone who could plan and execute a war well. And in fact, she challenged the authority of Alauddin Khalji for a long time, and she was a force to reckon with. She even issued the royal orders in her name, and in fact no matter could be brought before Sultan without her knowledge. Therefore, these are the kind of examples which prove time and again that it was not only indirect influence, but there was direct influence also of medieval women in politics. Then another example can be given of Umabai, who has been quoted by a contemporary chronicler, Mirate Ahmadi, Umabai was the wife of a late Senapati, Khanderao Dahakade, and she was entrusted with the collection of taxation known as Chauth from Gujarat. So, this again proves the point that I was trying to make. Having discussed all these facts, I shall now take a break and resume soon. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us this session on harem and women. Friends, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break and we are going to discuss more. Thank you for watching us. Hello friends, welcome back to the session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on harem and women, and for the discussion we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Pip. Dr. Shruti Pip is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Friends, for asking questions regarding the topic, we have our toll-free number through which you can ask questions, and our toll-free number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Pip, once again, and would request her to continue further. Hello, ma'am. Welcome back.
Hello. So, welcome back, friends. We were discussing the crucial role that was played by women in harem, which cannot be regarded as insignificant. So, talking about the role played by the talented women, there were some women who exploited their talents to assume full control over the emperor, thereby exercising some kind of an indirect sovereignty. One such example that can be quoted here is that of Noor Jahan. In order to strengthen her own position, she ensured that all the high offices were placed under the control of her own family members, and that is her father and her brothers. And this again conforms to the idea that a woman could exercise power through the male agency, and here the male agency was to be that of her own family members. and Rekha Mishra in her famous work Women in Mughal India opines that Noor Jahan's influence on Jahangir was also emotional in nature, and it will be rather unfair to attribute purely political ambition to her behind her acts. So therefore, it was not only one particular aspect that one needs to consider when one is discussing the role played by women in harem. There are scholars like K.S. Lal who have argued that Noor Jahan did not entertain any political ambitions of her own, but was merely serving her spouse as a loyal and a devoted wife. Now, this again is questionable, because with the kind of independence that she displayed in her designing designing of her costumes, jewelry, or in her indulging in various trading activities and in various other courtly intrigues, it just does not appear that she was just trying to be a loyal and a devoted wife. So therefore, there is no reason to suspect the skills of a lady of Zenana. The ladies were quite skillful, they were talented in the art of politics, diplomacy, court intrigues, as well as political negotiations, and therefore it was just not possible for them to stay aloof or to stay silent. Some of these exceptionally talented women of royal families even enjoyed an impressive control over the central administration, and in fact they approved all the farmans, etc. As hukam, and these there are a number of references to various hukams that were issued by the royal women. For example, Hamida Bano Begum, she issued a hukam which was addressed to the Karodis of Pargana, Mahabad, dated 1581, which shows that this was definitely the trend. Then there is another hukam of Maryam Zamani Wali Nimat Begum, dated 1623. She was a mother of Jahangir, and to this hukam was basically issued to realize the area of the revenue from Pargana of Chaupal in Sarkar Sambhal. So again, this shows that women were not only about court intrigues, they were also about, their involvement was also about administrative affairs. And as the case with Noor Jahan, the grants of appointments that were, that went out under the king's name, Noor Jahan put her seal on all the grants of land that were conferred upon, and which were then sealed by the Sadr of Empire. So therefore, she confirmed even the favors as hukam of Noor Jahan, dated 1626, against Jai Singh. So there are a number of such examples. She collected duties or on goods from merchants who passed through her jagirs, and she also traded with Europeans who brought luxury goods from the continent. Her powers in fact grew so vast that by the end of Jahangir's life, she acquired the de facto sovereignty, and in fact she was governing the empire in the name of the king. So this was definitely a very important example of how a talented woman could go well beyond the cultural realm and could very well transcend seclusion that had been bestowed upon her through tradition, and she could become an active participant in the state affairs. Then there is another hukam of Mumtaz Mahal confirming the appointment of Deshmukh, dated 1629, and so we do find references to acknowledging the receipt of produce from their assigned territories as Nishan of Jahan Ara of 1678, which acknowledges the receipt of musk pods, which proves that these women were also trading independently, and they were kind of, responsible for their actions. And it was not through the male members of the household that they were trying to indulge in these activities. Then another very important scenario that was emerging were a number of court decisions that the royal women were able to influence. They played an extremely important role in the court rituals, and they also occasionally intervened and they tried to change the decisions that had already been taken in the imperial court. So, for example, Akbar pardoned Niyabat Khan when one of his queens undertook to provide a security on his behalf, and therefore Akbar just could not overlook or disregard the request that had been made by one of his wives. Then Jahangir also pardoned Mirza Koka as a result of pressure from the imperial women to do so. This again is an example to prove that royalty was constantly under pressure from royal women, and many times their decision had to be changed. Then Jagat Singh was also forgiven by Jahangir, for example, owing to the intercession of Noor Jahan. And it was in fact on Jahan Ara's request that Aurangzeb was bestowed with a robe of honor, and later on a vast number of men and women were also given superior mansabs, stipends and daily allowances on the recommendations of royal women. So this was the level of their interference and the level of their influence over royal decisions. Now, having discussed in detail the political implications of women's participation, we would now discuss the another very important and interesting aspect, and that is the literary pursuits. Their active interest in literary pursuits has been proved time and again, and medieval Indian women, especially belonging to royalty, occupied themselves with reading, writing and also composing verses. So we have example of Shah Turkan, who was also much known amongst men of letters. Then due attention was paid towards the education of Turkish women. Then Razia is a very good example of one such woman who composed verses under the pen name of Shirin. She could recite Quran and all the prayers in a proper manner, and she also patronized men of letters and even got Madrasae Nasniya constructed. Then the Turkish royalty was definitely quite particular about education of their daughters. So therefore, the whole issue of female education during medieval period needs to be approached from this standpoint. In fact, there is a visual also of a school where the girl students are also present. One of the painting depicts this, which proves that probably there were girl students who were participating in the educational efforts that were being carried on. And during the reign of Akbar, there were definite arrangements that were made for imparting regular education to ladies of imperial harem. And in fact, there is a contemporary account also of Montserrat who says, who visited during the time of Akbar, and he observed that Akbar is very particular about the education of princesses, and in fact they are taught to read, write and trained in various ways by matrons, and these matrons were specifically instructed in the art of teaching princesses. And there is another painting which is of Persian style, in which there is a prince who is reading out a poetry to one of the princesses. Then a Hyderabad school painting belonging to mid 18th century again shows a Maulvi instructing a young princess. So these kind of visuals attest the fact that education among women, especially of royalty, was something which was common. Then women had deep interest in poetry also, and Muslim upper class ladies were fond of poetry, and they were usually introduced in the art of composing poetry by Persian lady teachers. And one very good example of this can be that of Gulbadan Begum, who was considered to be well versed in Persian and Turki, both the languages, and she often composed verses, and she even wrote Humayun Nama, which is again a very priceless source of the contemporary times. The most outstanding women scholar was of course Noor Jahan, and she composed poetry. She was a highly educated lady. Then Zebun Nisa was another daughter of Aurangzeb, was also a very good singer and also an accomplished poet. Then another example that can be given of one such lady was Salima Sultan Begum, who was one of the nieces of Humayun. She was well versed in Persian and made rich contributions in literary sphere by composing verses. In fact, she learnt Quran by heart and got 30,000 gold coins as reward. She knew Arabic as well as Persian, and in writing she could practice various kinds of hand. So, such was the multifaceted personality of this woman. Now, this kind of literary accomplishment was not only limited to Mughal women. There are a number of examples of Rajput women also taking keen interest in the literary affairs, and one very good example can be given, that of Mirabai, who was a well known singer as well as a bhakti poet, one of the very important female bhaktas, and she has been studied in detail by Parita Mukta, who has pointed out the real accomplishment and achievement of Mirabai was not that she was a female who had given up worldly life and taken to the path of bhakti, but her real accomplishment was that she formed a community. And in fact, she was able to win over so many supporters around her, and therefore this community in fact helped to heal, to nurture, and it also strengthened the community bonds among the oppressed. And therefore, she used the religious expression to show her own disapproval of the kind of life that she was forced to live. Then another example can be given of Ratnavali, wife of Puran Mai, who sang various Hindi melodies and also composed verses. Then Man Singh's wife, Mrignaini, was also an expert in music, and amongst Sahitya Sadhana we have Rajkumari Sodhi, then of Amarkot, Rajputri Champa Devi of Jaisalmer, Rajmata, Roop Kunwari of Alwar, etc. All these women were highly accomplished in music and compositions. Besides, the Rajput ladies were given training in horse riding also, and as well as in wielding weapons. And there are a number of visuals which also show Mughal royal ladies like Noor Jahan also wielding the gun while going on a shikar along with the emperor. Now, these kind of observations cannot only be made as far as the royalty was concerned. In fact, the women of service class also during the medieval period, all those who were engaged in harem, all those who offered their services in harem, they can also be considered as being versatile and open to learning. So we have example of the in charge of harem, Sati Khanam, who knew the art of reading Quran and was well acquainted with the Persian literature, and was appointed as as an instructress to Begum Sahiba. There is also a reference to female Vakya Navis, that is one who would read out newsletters in king's presence, which again proves the point that females were definitely educated, and it was not as if literary affairs were only for the male members of the society. Women's role in the field of education should be seen as a part of productive activity and also as constituting an intellectual activity or work. As tutors to other women, educating them in the art of composing poetry, in reading, writing and also prose, etc. So, therefore, some women also earned through the art of calligraphy, writing letters, then also making representations, orders, etc. on behalf of the royal women. So, therefore, it was not as if only the royal women had access to education and proper training, but the very fact that there were some other women belonging to not the royalty who were training the royal women in all these arts proves that education was definitely percolating down. It is true that most women were primarily instructed in religious education, but that it was not as if the whole process was focused only on religious education, and there was definitely some kind of secularization also of their training that was happening, as is seen as one can make out because of their wider knowledge pertaining to medicine, astrology and calligraphy. So, definitely these subjects had nothing to do with religion or theology, and there was some secular aspect that was attached to these various subjects. Having discussed these various aspects, now we can also talk about the next category of activities, and it is in this regard that I can talk about the recreational activities and the role played by recreational activities in harem in widening the scope of women participation in various activities. So, there are a number of Mughal paintings, a number of miniature paintings also belonging to various schools which highlight the lighter shades of the harem. The court life depicted in these paintings revolves around the ladies of the harem, and also many times the kings are also shown as spending some good quality time with the ladies of the harem. The ladies themselves enjoyed the music sessions that were going on the terraces, and the most memorable events that were shown in these paintings were those of the birth of a prince, which ensured that all the female members of the harem participated in the celebration of this great event, because it was ultimately about the successor having taken the birth of a successor having taken place. So, these were the kind of community events which gave lot of importance to women participation, and which also gave them an opportunity to give a vent to their own experiences, their own feelings, and their own styles of dressing, etc. were made public during such occasions. Then another very important part of the culture of harem was occasional fairs that were organized from time to time, and a special kind of fair was held at the court to legitimize the authority of the monarch before the women who were present at the fair. So, the kind of styles that were patronized in the fair, and the kind of display of wealth and various commodities that happened during a fair went a long way, not only in involving women, but also in displaying the kind of changes that were that were coming about in fashion, in attire, and also in conveying a kind of political statement of power and political prestige that was emerging. So besides dancing and singing, women were also involved in various games like chess, polo, which again proved that these sports or activities were kind of incomplete without their participation or without their providing audiences to what their men were doing. Thus, the contemporary attitude was not altogether biased towards women even during medieval period. In fact, it was not that women were devoid of power of reason, but that patriarchal mind was not ready to share power with women who could pose a threat to their own power. And with this observation, I shall now like to bring an end to this discussion. So therefore, one needs to go into greater details of the nitty-gritties behind the gendered implications of power politics that were emerging during the Mughal and during the Sultanate period, and how Zenana continued to play a very important and central role in this entire process of change and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us this session on Harem and Women, and friends, we believe that you might have discovered a lot through this session, and you might have certain questions also. If you're not able to ask questions live, then you can definitely ask questions through our email ID, that is info.cec@nic.in. Ma'am, what else are we going to study in the future sessions under this series on women in history?
Now since we are talking about the medieval Indian history, we would also be talking about the Bhakti and the Sufi movement, and we would be discussing as to how during these two movements the important role that was played by women, because generally their role is overlooked. Just as we discussed how the politics evolved in harem and how there are some hidden shades of how women were performing very important and active roles which have not really been sufficiently studied. So similarly, we see that when we are talking about Bhakti movement, it is generally the male bhaktas who are generally discussed, like Kabir Das, Sur Das, and so many other Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So these the focus is largely on the contribution of male bhaktas, but what about the female bhaktas who also played a very important role, and in fact they kind of conveyed a different kind of a message to society. Many of the female bhaktas, they just stopped wearing clothes and they started moving around naked. They declared that the naked state was the best state for them, because by being in that state they could be one with their Lord, and there was no need for them to cover themselves. So these are the kind of some interesting traditions and metaphors that one needs to take into account. So therefore, the next lecture would definitely focus on the important literary contributions of the Bhakti saints of India, with special reference to women bhaktas.
Definitely, we are going to cover, as Dr. Shruti Vip herself said that in the future session we would be covering on the following topic. When we are talking about women in history, are there the women writers who have specifically written about their history?
Well, one cannot, a very good example of that is Gulbadan Bano Begum, about whom I have made a detailed reference in today's lecture and last lecture also, who wrote Humayun Nama, and in that she has given a beautiful description of the kind of life women were leading in harem. So this is one such autobiography in which an attempt has been made by a woman author to discuss details of a woman's lives, because otherwise history writing is all about rulers, it is about emperors, it is about their contributions, it is about their wars. But here there was a lady who thought it important to give information about the day-to-day functioning of Zenana and how the emperor would be visiting which woman at during which part of the day, and the kind of the time, the amount of time he would be spending with which woman, and which woman he considered as worthy of taking more and more, spending time more and more, and also discussing the problems of the state. So with these kind of detailed descriptions that are part of this work, this has come very handy for various historians who are interested in gender discourse and who want to rewrite history from the perspective of not only what was male power or what was male authority all about, but from a more unbiased kind of a gender sensitive approach.
This is the last question of this session. Can media play an important role while displaying what women was in the history? Like there is a chance to bring women in the history through the cinema also.
Yeah, definitely. Media has a very important role to play in this, and in fact I have conducted a series of lecture on this also, where I have given a number of examples as to how media ends up portraying a very negative image of women even in present context, by projecting women as the role model, as the ideal homemaker, as a woman who is happy cooking with the best ingredients on earth, who should be aware of the healthy quotient of the family. So a particular kind of image is being portrayed. So similarly in history, one can talk about, one can give examples of various women who were actively part of politics, as I have given you a number of examples. So it was not only Razia Sultan that one can talk of, there were a number of women, and it was not only Rani Lakshmi Bai that one can talk of. So there is a need to go into some kind of a gendered historical research and come up with some valid examples, and then try to unearth the hidden and the unexplored aspects related to such women, and then portray them on the screen. Then definitely it can be a great job.
With this note, thank you. Thank you once again for giving us this interesting lecture on Harem and Women. And dear friends, if you wish to write to us, then you can contact us through our email ID, that is info.cec@nic.in. Here you can put in your questions as well as your feedbacks for the lecture too. We are going to upload this lecture on YouTube soon. So keep watching us, keep writing us. We are taking your leave with the promise that we are going to have yet another vivacious session on the series Women in History. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.